Shabbat Shalom. Once again, we are continuing our cycle from Bereshit through the entirety of the book of Genesis, unraveling the entire purpose of the Torah. And you may be getting lost in the weeds of the plot, so let me remind you again. Creation begins, we are made, and of course the defining feature of that first parasha is that we now have a choice between doing good and doing evil. The second Torah portion of Noach, we find out that most people are choosing to do evil. And so God does the big flood, but as we talked about, that isn't the point. The point is what comes afterwards, which is the rainbow, reminding us that God is not going to do that ever again, meaning that responsibility ultimately for the world and its goodness is going to rest on our shoulders. Following from that, with Lech Lecha, we are introduced to this new notion that God is not going to simply make proclamations. God is going to cultivate a relationship with one family through the covenant, Abraham and Sarah, and out of this family will come the nucleus, which God will use to then build a sense of goodness for the world. We're all with me so far. We then follow up with Vayera with this concept of justice when the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah are en route, and God says, Abraham and his descendants will be responsible for justice. I must take them into my confidence. I must talk to them about what is about to happen. They will need to know this. We are riding high on the glory of this covenant, leading for us to be there as beacons of justice. And then the next Torah portion with Chayei Sarah, we bury Sarah and we get the marriage of Isaac, and it all gets mundane again. And as we talked about, that's important because doing the mundane properly, doing the mundane righteously is essential. You can't simply live in the rarefied atmosphere of doing justice for the world if you're not going to do what is right by your own family. And so we begin to get into the conversation that will consume the Torah for the rest of its chapters until we finish Genesis. How do you do right by the family? Last week, we saw some problems when Jacob and Esau, of course, are tussling in the womb, and Jacob gets into a little bit of a pickle over the deception of his father and the stealing of the blessing, which is how we end up in this week's Torah portion, where he is now, subject to Lavan's mistreatment. There are many things that go on here that are right on topic for what we've been doing, but I want to focus on the most obvious, the biggest, and the least understood, which is the giant wheel behind me. All right, what's up there in that stained glass window all around the edges? The tribes. But before they were tribes, what were they? Jacob's children. Kids. Kids are hard. Okay, anybody not know that? That raising one child is hard, raising two is more than twice as hard, raising three is more than 3 times as hard. This is some sort of exponential, if not logarithmic progression here of the challenges that go into having this many children. Imagine having 12, not counting potential sisters, imagine having 12 coming from rival mothers who happen to also be sisters. Yes, this is a challenge, shall we say. But of course, that is the point, because God is trying to teach us, through the example of our ancestors, a very essential lesson, which is, how do you actually make this work? Because, as I said before, God is not looking for the grand relationship with the entire world all at once. At this point in the Torah, God is trying to cultivate, tease out of the soil of one family a line that will be able to carry forth this goodness. But there's been a problem so far. When Isaac and Ishmael were brothers, Ishmael falls off the wayside and becomes his own thing. With Esau and Jacob, well, we know that Esau is going to fly off and do his own thing. We're not going to get anywhere like this, people. the family isn't growing. The number of people who are allied with God's brit of covenant in this way is not expanding. We need all of those people to actually stick together before they can become the tribes of the people of Israel and create the nation that God is building towards. If everybody keeps disappearing and we end up with only one person out of the family sticking with it for the next generation, we're not getting anywhere. Great for that one person, sure, no problem, but we actually need them to stick together. And in this week's Torah portion, we get to the first example of that actually happening. Not with Jacob, because Jacob has fled from his family, and at the end of this week's Torah portion, he flees from his in-law family, from Lavan. He's not exactly finding ways to make this work. Instead, this week, we turn to his wives, Rachel and Leah. They show us the first glimmer of how this will actually work, of how that wheel is going to stay together rather than become shattered into 1,000 pieces. There's still more work to be done, as we see through the rest of the Torah portions. But the mothers show insight. In particular, they show insight in an episode that everybody always wants to skip or gossip about, and in both cases miss the point. The mandrake root, right? Okay, we don't know exactly which root it is, but we're going to call it mandrake because that's easier in English. It seems that Reuben, the firstborn of Leah, the firstborn kid of all, has gone out during the wheat harvest and he has found this root. Now, this root was considered to have medicinal properties. In particular, it was considered to be an aid to infertility. And therefore, having that root was a real blessing. It would mean that there'll be more kids. Now, who is Reuben going to give the root to? His mom, right? He's not going to give it to his aunt, to Rachel, even though at this point Rachel has had no children and Leah has already had 4. So he's not going to give it to his mom to his aunt, because Rachel is his mother's rival. What do we know about these two? Well, we know that Rachel is loved by Jacob and Leah is not. She's had plenty of kids by Jacob, but she is not actually liked in and of herself. She is definitely second best, and really the term that's used could also be described as despised her. And as the co-conspirator with her father Lavan, who made it so that he didn't marry Rachel that first night, I can understand why Jacob might still be a little resentful of her, but he is going through the motions, doing his duties, and that's about it. Well, if the duty for her is to have kids, because that's all she can get, then this mandrake root is very important, because she seems to be tapering off of her fertility, and therefore this might help jumpstart it once again. But Rachel has had no kids. And yes, she has her husband's affection, but that's it. Now you might be thinking, well, that's enough. Well, Hannah didn't think that was enough with Elkanah either. It seems like these women want more than to simply be adored by their husband. They actually want to have something that they have built for themselves. And in this time and place, in this part of the world, at this generation, that meant having children. And that is something that she is still lacking. So here comes this root. One mother wants it in order to perhaps rekindle her fertility and maybe even kindle some relationship with her estranged husband. And the other wants it to kindle a future, to kindle an accomplishment that has been denied her all of these years. How does it get sorted out? Does Jacob, the man of the house, say, now, ladies, let me settle this argument for you. After all, it was one of my children that found this, therefore it technically belongs to me as the head of the household. I will decide who will get the root. No. Because Jacob, as we saw with the issue of the blessing that Rachel was looking for her own fertility, doesn't seem to really be aware or involved in the competition among these two wives. He is very much out with the sheep, doing his shepherd thing, and they are struggling on their own. And so it falls to Rachel and Leah to take care of this issue themselves. Rachel comes and asks her sister, "Can I have it?" And Leah's response is, "You've already got my husband," meaning you've already got his love. "You want this too?" Now, this is where we begin to see the Torah's message. Here are two women that are hurt. Here are two women that are struggling. And they are facing off against the person that they see as their rival. But in this moment of vulnerability between both of them, asking for what they need as they each are asking for something, we can see they are allowing this to begin to heal. Without actually stating what you need, you can never resolve this kind of conflict, this issue. And in fact, what each of them need is not necessarily what we think. Does Leah really just need more kids? No. Right? She has already recognized, especially with that birth of Judah, the final of the first 4 boys, that she is no longer trying to buy her husband's love by producing babies for him. That's not going to happen. And instead, she thanks God for herself for this child. And at that point, she is satisfied with what she has accomplished for herself through her children. And whatever happens with her husband, she's almost given up at that point. And Rachel? Well, Rachel has that affection, but she is desperate to build something of her own. It's why she says when she gives over her handmaiden, "I will be built up through her." She is looking to have that sense of accomplishment, of personal success that is not necessarily dependent upon just being the pretty one that her husband happens to find more affectionate. And so she asks. Leah resists. And the compromise is? Anybody remember what happens? Because it's a beautiful, beautiful compromise. She bought it. That is to say, Rachel says, "Tell you what, let's make a deal. Let's compromise. All right, I'm not going to ask you for the root and give you nothing. And when you give it, you're going to get something. And what you're going to get is Jacob. Tonight, Jacob will go to you. Right? Not because it's your turn, not because it's the duty. He'll go to you, and he will be with you, because it will be good for you." And there's some implication that Rachel is trying to steer this so that her sister is actually able to be with Jacob, whom apparently she still has feelings for, so that Leah will actually be able to be with him just to be with him. And in exchange, she will get the root that will help with her fertility. And guess what happens? Lo and behold, they both get what they want. They each gave up something. Rachel giving up some of the affection of her husband, steering him towards Leah, and Leah giving up this potential cure for her now burgeoning infertility, a problem she'd never dealt with before. And yet immediately after this discussion, only a few verses, Leah starts conceiving again and has more children. And Rachel, of course, also begins to conceive. It is through the reconciliation between the two of them, recognizing that the needs of the other member of the family are valid, that they are legitimate, and that they are not in stark competition to me, but instead we need to find a way that both of us can get what we actually need. She needs affection, I need the fertility. We can each get both of what we need if we're willing to compromise, if we're willing to work together. And that sets the stage for what comes next. Because it is only through that understanding, that vulnerability of expressing what is actually needed within each member's of life, and the willingness to accept that they have a legitimate right to be better off than they currently are, and that each member of the family is in some way capable and responsible for helping that to transition into a better state. That's the only way that that window stays intact. Because up till this point, all the siblings have been rival, all the way back to Cain and Abel. The first two people who had the most reason to be rivals, Rachel and Leah. These are the first two that begin the process of reconciliation, of showing that siblings do not have to be at each other's throat. It's going to be a few chapters before we get the men to catch on, but hey, they do get there eventually. But let us be thankful. And when we, in just a moment, turn to our Amidah and we are reminding ourselves of our ancestors, remember, they are not just our ancestors. They're not just the people from which we derive some genetic material. They're not just the people that were placeholders in order to keep our history going. These are people, individuals, who fought and struggled with each other, with themselves, and with God. And in their struggles, we can see the template for resolutions to ourselves. When we have an argument, a fight, some form of bitter rivalry with a member of our family, whether it be a sibling or anyone else, stop and ask yourself, what are we actually fighting about? Why do I resent them so? Why do I not want them to succeed in whatever it is that I am upset about? Or why does it feel like that way to me? And maybe perhaps if I open myself up to the idea that something in them is a legitimate issue, and something in me may be different than the surface topic that we're arguing over, like children fighting for who gets to sit in the front seat, maybe there is room for us to swap a route and find an actual resolution for both of our pain and come to some better understanding of each other and keep that window intact. So when we mention Rachel and Leah, they are not just the two at the end of the list. They are the two at the start of our people as a people, showing us how to live together. With that, Shabbat Shalom.